On the 24th of May, 2026, in the heart of the Strait of Hormuz, the United States destroyed 90% of Iran's 8,000 naval mines and sank 161 IRGC vessels in one of the most devastating naval campaigns in modern history. While Tehran publicly pushes for ceasefire talks, it is now secretly reviewing a brutal one-page American memorandum demanding full surrender of its highly enriched uranium stockpile, a 5-year enrichment ban, and complete opening of the strait. This is not diplomacy. This is checkmate. The regime that once held the world's energy hostage is now fighting for survival. Tell me in the comments, do you think Iran will surrender or risk everything in one final desperate move? Just hours after the devastating U.S. naval campaign that destroyed 90% of its mine stockpile and sank 161 vessels, Iran is attempting a high-stakes diplomatic maneuver to buy time. Tehran submitted a lengthy 14-point proposal demanding full U.S. military withdrawal from the Gulf, $150 billion in war reparations, the unfreezing of all Iranian assets abroad, and recognition of Iranian dominance over the Strait of Hormuz. The document was delivered through Pakistani mediators in a clear attempt to shift the conversation away from military defeat toward political negotiation. The American response was brutally concise, a single-page memorandum that left no room for ambiguity. Iran must surrender its entire stockpile of highly enriched uranium, accept a 15-year moratorium on all uranium enrichment activities, and guarantee unconditional, permanent opening of the Strait of Hormuz to international shipping. The contrast is striking. While the IRGC continues its defiant public rhetoric with commanders declaring, "We have not even begun yet," elements within the Iranian government are quietly reviewing the harsh U.S. demands. Pakistani mediators are working intensively behind the scenes, hoping to broker a face-saving compromise before the situation spirals further. This is classic Iranian diplomatic stalling. Tehran is trying to use negotiations as a pressure valve to slow down American military momentum, while hoping internal divisions in Washington or international fatigue will soften the U.S. position. However, after the catastrophic losses of May 20th, Iran is rapidly running out of leverage and time. The regime is caught between its hardline base, demanding resistance, and the cold reality of a collapsing economy and devastated naval capability. The next few days will reveal whether Iran's diplomatic game is a genuine attempt at de-escalation or simply a desperate delay tactic. While Iran attempts to stall through diplomacy and submits its 14-point proposal, the United States is not waiting for an answer. It is acting decisively on the water. In one of the most intensive naval campaigns in recent history, U.S.-led coalition forces have already destroyed approximately 7,200 naval mines, representing 90% of Iran's estimated total stockpile of 8,000 mines. At the same time, American and partner navies have sunk or disabled 161 IRGC and Iranian Navy vessels, including many of the key mine-laying platforms and fast attack craft that formed the backbone of Tehran's asymmetric strategy. The operation is centered around the powerful USS George H.W. Bush Carrier Strike Group, supported by Arleigh Burke-class destroyers, such as the USS John Finn and USS Milius, Independence-class littoral combat ships, and a large fleet of specialized underwater drones. These forces are working methodically to clear safe corridors through the most heavily mined sections of the strait, particularly the narrow 2-1 nautical mile passage between Iran and Oman. Advanced mine countermeasures are playing a decisive role. Mk-18 Mod, 2 Kingfish and Knifefish autonomous underwater vehicles scan the seabed in real time. MH-60 Seahawk helicopters equipped with airborne laser mine detection systems identify mines from the air, while Archerfish kamikaze robots destroy them with precision. This combination of manned and unmanned systems has allowed the coalition to clear large areas much faster and safer than traditional methods. Safe passage for commercial ships is gradually expanding. Several major shipping companies have already begun using the newly cleared corridors under U.S. naval escort, although traffic remains far below normal levels due to lingering risks. This is far more than a routine escort mission. The United States is not simply reacting to Iran's aggression, it is systematically dismantling the IRGC's decades-old asymmetric naval doctrine. The Mosquito fleet and mine strategy that Tehran spent over 20 years developing has been largely neutralized in a matter of weeks through a devastating combination of overwhelming naval power and cutting-edge robotics. The psychological blow to the IRGC is immense. Commanders who once boasted they could close the strait within hours are now watching their carefully prepared minefields and attack boats disappear one by one. Many fast attack boat crews have reportedly refused orders to return to the most dangerous zones. But beyond the military success, there is a vital humanistic dimension. Every neutralized mine and every cleared corridor reduces the risk of a catastrophic environmental disaster. A single major incident involving a very large crude carrier could spill millions of barrels of oil into the Gulf, devastating marine ecosystems and coastal communities for generations. By clearing these threats, the U.S. and its partners are protecting not only freedom of navigation, but also the fragile marine environment and the livelihoods of millions who depend on these waters. The United States has sent an unmistakable message. It will not allow Iran to hold the global economy hostage. The IRGC's most powerful tool has been exposed, and it is being dismantled in real time. The clock is now ticking loudly in Tehran. Following the devastating U.S. naval campaign that destroyed 90% of Iran's mine stockpile and sank 161 vessels, Iranian leadership is currently evaluating the harsh one-page American memorandum delivered through Pakistani mediators. The document is uncompromising. Full surrender of Iran's highly enriched uranium stockpile, a complete 5-year moratorium on all uranium enrichment activities, and unconditional, permanent opening of the Strait of Hormuz to international commercial shipping. President Trump has been crystal clear about the consequences. In a statement on May 20th, he warned that if Iran rejects the deal, American bombing will resume at much higher intensity than Operation Epic Fury. Agreement, on the other hand, would lead to an immediate pause in the naval blockade and the possibility of phased sanctions relief. China is applying heavy behind-the-scenes pressure on Tehran to respond quickly. Beijing, which imports over 40% of its crude oil from the Middle East, is deeply concerned about any further disruption to energy flows. Pakistani mediators are working intensely, holding marathon meetings in both Tehran and Muscat, hoping to broker a face-saving compromise before the situation spirals out of control. This is the gladiator moment. Iran's leadership now faces an agonizing choice: accept a humiliating but survivable deal that would severely limit its nuclear program and regional influence, or reject it and risk a far more destructive round of American strikes that could target remaining underground facilities, oil infrastructure, and military command centers. The window for a dignified exit is closing rapidly, perhaps within the next 48 hours. The internal debate in Tehran is reportedly fierce. Hardline elements within the IRGC are pushing for escalation, arguing that surrender would destroy the regime's legitimacy. More pragmatic voices, including some within President Pezeshkian's circle, are warning that continued defiance could lead to the collapse of the Iranian economy and possible regime-threatening instability. The stakes could not be higher. A wrong decision in the coming hours could trigger a much wider conflict, with consequences reaching far beyond the Gulf. Global oil prices, already volatile, could surge dramatically. Millions of families worldwide would feel the pain through higher fuel and food costs. This is no longer just about diplomacy or military posturing. It is about whether the Iranian regime will finally accept the new reality or choose a path that could bring even greater suffering to its own people and the region. The next 48 hours may decide the fate of this crisis. While Iran weighs its fateful decision in the next 48 hours, a deeper, longer-term shift is reshaping the entire Middle East, one that may prove even more consequential than the immediate military standoff. The Gulf states are no longer waiting for the outcome in Hormuz. They are actively building a future that no longer depends on it. The UAE is accelerating the second Habshan-Fujairah pipeline, aiming to boost export capacity through the Gulf of Oman to 3.6 million barrels per day by late 2027. Saudi Arabia is pushing the Petroline expansion to a full 7 million barrels per day and fast-tracking its $26.6 billion land bridge railway project, which will connect Jeddah on the Red Sea directly to Dammam on the Gulf. These massive bypass routes are designed to make the Strait of Hormuz optional for a growing share of their energy exports. At the same time, Gulf nations are strengthening their defense capabilities through deeper cooperation with Turkey. The UAE has integrated Al-Tariq precision-guided munitions onto Bayraktar Akinci heavy attack drones. Saudi Arabia has signed major contracts for Korkut anti-drone systems and advanced laser weapons. Kuwait, Qatar, and even Iraq are acquiring Turkish Hisar air defense batteries and Akinci UAVs to create layered protection around their critical energy infrastructure. This is a historic strategic realignment. For decades, the Gulf states lived with the constant fear that Iran could disrupt their oil exports by threatening the Strait of Hormuz. Now, they are building an independent energy and security architecture, pipelines, railways, and modern defense systems that dramatically reduces Tehran's leverage. Iran's Ring of Fire proxy strategy and its control over Hormuz are both eroding at the same time. Russia and China, while still providing limited support, cannot fully replace the financial and logistical role Dubai once played. Tehran is finding itself increasingly isolated as its former neutral neighbors choose stronger security partnerships and alternative routes. The Gulf states are no longer passive victims of geography. They are actively rewriting the map with steel, technology, and strategic foresight. This quiet revolution may ultimately prove more transformative than many kinetic battles in recent years. But behind these grand strategic moves lies a deeply human reality. These bypass routes and defense investments are ultimately about protecting stability. Secure energy flows mean more predictable oil prices, which directly affect the cost of gasoline, food, transportation, and heating for millions of families across Asia, Europe, and beyond. By reducing dependence on the volatile Strait of Hormuz, the Gulf states are helping prevent sudden economic shocks that hit the poorest households the hardest. The message from Abu Dhabi and Riyadh is unmistakable. The era of living at the mercy of Iranian threats is ending. The Gulf is building a new future, one based on self-reliance, resilience, and reduced vulnerability. And Iran is watching its once powerful geographic advantage slip away, perhaps forever. After weeks of escalating tension and dramatic developments, the strategic picture in the Strait of Hormuz is now painfully clear. Iran's Hormuz doctrine, the cornerstone of its regional power for more than 4 decades, is collapsing under sustained American naval pressure and the Gulf states' rapid construction of bypass infrastructure. What Tehran once considered its ultimate trump card has been exposed, degraded, and rendered increasingly irrelevant in a matter of weeks. The combination of destroyed minefields, sunk vessels, and new alternative routes has stripped Iran of its most potent leverage over global energy flows. The regime in Tehran now stands at a historic and painful crossroads. It must choose between a controlled but humiliating diplomatic retreat, accepting significant limitations on its nuclear program, and opening the strait, or risking a far more destructive round of escalation that could lead to even greater military and economic devastation. The next 48 hours may well determine whether this dangerous chapter ends in a negotiated settlement or spirals into a much wider and more costly confrontation. Long-term, a new security and trade architecture is emerging across the Middle East. The UAE and Saudi Arabia are no longer passive players at the mercy of geography. Through massive bypass pipelines, high-speed railways, and strengthened defense partnerships with Turkey, they are building a future where Iran's ability to hold the region hostage is dramatically reduced. Iran's Ring of Fire proxy strategy and its control over Hormuz are both eroding at the same time. Neither Russia nor China appears willing or able to fully compensate for Tehran's growing isolation. What we are witnessing is the slow but steady unraveling of a doctrine Iran nurtured for generations. The IRGC's decision to weaponize the Strait of Hormuz has backfired spectacularly. By turning a vital global artery into a battlefield, Tehran has accelerated the very isolation and strategic weakness it sought to avoid. The balance of power in the Gulf has shifted perhaps permanently away from Iran. But behind all these grand strategic calculations lies a deeply human reality. This crisis is ultimately about people. It is about whether one regime can continue endangering the lives and livelihoods of millions of Iranian families facing economic collapse, Gulf residents living under the daily threat of conflict, and ordinary citizens worldwide worried about sudden spikes in fuel and food prices. Every mine destroyed, every ship sunk, and every bypass route completed carries the hope of greater stability so that families can live without the constant shadow of war and economic despair. True leadership in this moment means choosing de-escalation and pragmatism over reckless confrontation. The coming days will test whether Iran's leaders have the wisdom to recognize this reality before the cost becomes even higher. The Strait of Hormuz, long a symbol of tension and blackmail, may finally be on the path toward becoming just another important waterway rather than a permanent hostage situation for the world.